On January 24th, 41 AD, Gaius Caesar Germanicus, the emperor known as Caligula, was walking through a narrow corridor beneath the Palatine Hill when his own bodyguards turned on him. Cassius Chaerea, a Praetorian officer Caligula had openly mocked for his voice, struck first. The others followed. By the time it was over, the emperor had been stabbed 30 times. His wife was killed shortly after. His infant daughter had her head smashed against a wall. The Praetorian Guard then dragged his uncle Claudius from behind a curtain and declared him the next emperor. Caligula had ruled for less than 4 years, but his death was not unusual. Of the roughly 70 men who held the title of Roman emperor over 5 centuries, the majority did not die peacefully. They were murdered by guards, by family, by their own soldiers, by foreign enemies, and by their own hand. This is how every one of them died. In 193 AD, Pertinax tried to reform the Praetorian Guard after the chaos left by Commodus. They gave him 86 days. On March 28th, a group of soldiers stormed the imperial palace and killed him. What followed was perhaps the most absurd transaction in Roman political history. The Guard put the empire itself up for auction, and a wealthy senator named deadliest Julianus bought it with a promise of 25,000 sesterces per soldier. He lasted 66 days before the Senate had him executed in his own quarters. But deadliest Julianus was neither the first nor the last emperor killed by the men sworn to protect him. In 69 AD, Galba refused to pay the Praetorians their promised bonus. On January 15th, soldiers cut him down in the Forum and paraded his head on a spear. In 222 AD, Elagabalus, who had become emperor at 14, was murdered by Praetorians in a latrine at the age of 18. His body was dragged through the streets and thrown into the Tiber. In 235 AD, Severus Alexander was killed alongside his mother by mutinous troops who replaced him with Maximinus Thrax, a former shepherd who became the first common-born emperor. In 238 AD, co-emperors Pupienus and Balbinus were dragged from the palace and butchered by Praetorians on the same day, just 99 days into their joint rule. In 192 AD, Commodus survived a dose of poison, only for a wrestler named Narcissus to be sent into his bath chambers to strangle him on New Year's Eve. His body was carried out before dawn, and the Senate voted to erase his name from every monument in Rome. And in 96 AD, Domitian. It's an emperor so paranoid he had the walls of his palace lined with reflective stone so no one could approach unseen, was stabbed by a household servant who had hidden a dagger inside a bandaged arm. In 211 AD, Caracalla murdered his brother Geta in front of their mother. Geta reportedly died in her arms while soldiers held her back. Caracalla then ordered the deaths of roughly 20,000 of Geta's supporters across the empire, and had his brother's name chiseled off every inscription in Rome. But Caracalla's own end was no less violent. On April 8, 217 AD, while traveling to a temple near Carrhae, he dismounted to relieve himself by the roadside. A soldier named Martialis, whose brother Caracalla had executed, walked up and stabbed him while he was urinating. The Praetorian prefect Macrinus, who had orchestrated the plot, became emperor the same week. In 54 AD, Claudius was almost certainly poisoned by his wife Agrippina, who wanted her son Nero on the throne. The method, according to most ancient sources, was a dish of mushrooms served at dinner. Nero became emperor that same night at the age of 16. In 37 AD, the dying emperor Tiberius was reportedly smothered with a pillow, possibly by Caligula himself, possibly by the Praetorian prefect Macro, after the old man showed signs of recovering from what everyone assumed was his final illness. In 244 AD, Gordian III died on campaign in Persia, under circumstances that were never fully explained. His Praetorian prefect Philip the Arab took the throne immediately after, and few believed that was a coincidence. In 284 AD, the Emperor Numerian was found dead inside his own enclosed litter. His body had been decomposing for days, the smell hidden by incense burned on orders of his father-in-law Arrius Aper. When the curtains were finally opened, the conspiracy was obvious. In 455 AD, Valentinian III personally stabbed his general Aetius to death during a meeting. Months later, two of Aetius's former bodyguards walked up to the emperor in broad daylight and killed him. And in 81 AD, Titus died of a sudden fever at 41. The historian Cassius Dio recorded rumors that his brother Domitian had arranged it. In 238 AD, Maximinus Thrax was camped outside the walls of Aquileia, besieging the city, when his own starving soldiers turned on him. They killed him and his son in their tent, cut off both heads, and sent them to Rome on spears. It was a pattern that would repeat for decades. In 268 AD, Gallienus was assassinated by his own senior officers during the siege of Mediolanum. The conspiracy involved several of his top commanders, and the man who replaced him, Claudius Gothicus, almost certainly knew in advance. In 275 AD, Aurelian, the emperor known as the restorer of the world for reunifying the entire empire after decades of civil war, was murdered by his own officers near Caenofrurium in Thrace. But the killing was based on a forgery. His secretary Eros, fearing punishment for a minor offense, he had fabricated a document listing officers Aurelian supposedly planned to execute. The officers believed it and struck first. When the deception was uncovered, they executed Eros. But Rome's greatest military emperor in a generation was already face down in the dirt. In 282 AD, Probus was murdered by soldiers resentful of being forced to dig canals and drain marshes during peacetime. In 276 AD, two emperors were killed by their own troops within months of each other. Tacitus, the elderly senator who had been chosen to succeed Aurelian, lasted roughly 6 months before soldiers killed him in Tarsus. Florianus, who claimed the throne after him, lasted 88 days before his own men cut his throat and defected to Probus. In 253 AD, Trebonianus Gallus was killed by his soldiers when they decided to back Aemilianus instead. Aemilianus then ruled for roughly 3 months before his own soldiers did the same thing when a larger army under Valerian approached. In 285 AD, Carinus was reportedly killed by one of his own officers, whose wife Carinus had seduced. And in 383 AD, Gratian was abandoned by his entire army at the Rhine, hunted down while fleeing, and executed on the orders of the usurper Magnus Maximus. In 251 AD, Decius became the first Roman emperor killed in battle by a foreign enemy. He and his son fell at the Battle of Abritus against the Goths in what is now Bulgaria. Their bodies were never recovered, but Decius would not be the last emperor to disappear into foreign ground. In 378 AD, Valens led his army against the Visigoths at Adrianople in one of the worst military disasters in Roman history. The Roman line collapsed in the summer heat. Valens was wounded and carried to a nearby farmhouse. According to the most common account, the Goths set the building on fire with him still inside. His body was never found. In 363 AD, Julian, the last emperor to reject Christianity and attempt to restore the old gods, was leading a campaign deep into Persian territory when a spear struck him in the abdomen during a skirmish near Samarra. But the spear came from behind Roman lines. No Persian attacker was ever identified, and rumors spread immediately that a Christian soldier had killed the last pagan emperor. His successor Jovian restored Christianity within weeks. Julian's religious revival died the same night he did. In 238 AD, Gordian II was killed in battle outside Carthage after only 20 days as emperor. His forces were outnumbered by troops loyal to the governor of Numidia. When his father Gordian I received the news, he hanged himself. In 340 AD, Constantine II was ambushed and killed near Aquileia while marching against his own brother. In 249 AD, Philip the Arab was killed at the Battle of Verona by the forces of Decius, the same Decius who would himself die at Abritus only 2 years later. In 218 AD, Macrinus, the man who had arranged Caracalla's murder, was defeated by the army backing the 14-year-old Elagabalus. He was captured while fleeing disguised as a civilian and executed on the road. And in 283 AD, the Emperor Carus died on campaign in Persia. The official explanation was that he had been struck by lightning in his tent. Almost no one believed it. In 69 AD, after losing the Battle of Bedriacum, the Emperor Otho returned to his camp, wrote letters, distributed money to his servants, and said goodnight to his staff. At dawn, he drove a dagger into his chest. He had been emperor for 91 days. Even his enemies acknowledged the composure. In 238 AD, Gordian I hanged himself after a messenger arrived with the news that his son Gordian II had been killed in battle against forces loyal to the governor of Numidia. Their combined reign had lasted 20 days. In 270 AD, Quintillus ruled for only 17 days before either opening his own veins or being killed by soldiers who decided they preferred Aurelian. Sources disagree on which. In 310 AD, Maximian was cornered by Constantine after a failed attempt to reclaim the throne and forced to take his own life. He had already abdicated once, come out of retirement, and tried to seize power twice before Constantine ended the cycle. In 313 AD, Maximinus Daia swallowed poison after his army was destroyed by Licinius at the Battle of Tsirallum. He reportedly took several days to die. In 307 AD, Severus II was captured by Maxentius and forced to open his veins. Whether it was suicide or execution depended on which historian was writing. In 392 AD, the young Emperor Valentinian II was found hanging in his residence in Gaul. The official ruling was suicide, but his general Arbogast, who had been steadily stripping the emperor of any real authority, was widely suspected. Arbogast did not claim the throne himself. Instead, he installed a former rhetoric teacher named Eugenius as a puppet emperor, which convinced almost no one. And in 68 AD, Nero, the last of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, fled Rome after the Senate declared him a public enemy. But his death belongs to a later section of this story, alongside the other emperors whose endings outlasted the empire itself. Some emperors were pulled from the throne before they were killed. In 69 AD, Vitellius was found hiding in a doorkeeper's lodge as Vespasian's forces swept through Rome. Soldiers dragged him out half naked, bound his hands, looped a rope around his neck, and paraded him through the streets while crowds pelted him with refuse. He was tortured, killed, and his body was thrown into the Tiber. He had ruled for 8 months. In 325 AD, Licinius surrendered to Constantine on an explicit promise that his life would be spared. Constantine had him hanged the following year. In 350 AD, the Emperor Constans was overthrown by the usurper Magnentius. He fled south but was hunted down and killed near the Spanish border. In 456 AD, the Emperor of Vitus was deposed by the general Ricimer, forced to become a bishop, and then murdered shortly after. In 461 AD, Ricimer struck again. Majorian, one of the last Western emperors who had actually attempted to hold the empire together, was deposed, tortured, and beheaded. In 465 AD, Ricimer's puppet emperor Libius Severus died under circumstances widely believed to be poisoning, almost certainly on Ricimer's orders. In 472 AD, Ricimer's soldiers hunted the emperor Anthemius through the streets of Rome itself and found him hiding inside a church. They beheaded him on the spot. 4 emperors destroyed by the same man. In 455 AD, Petronius Maximus tried to flee Rome as the Vandals closed in after a reign of just 75 days. A mob caught him before he reached the gates, beat him to death, and threw his body into the Tiber, the same river that had received Vitellius nearly 4 centuries earlier. In 480 AD, Julius Nepos, made the last Western emperor recognized as legitimate by Constantinople, was stabbed by his own retainers in Dalmatia. No one was punished for it. And in 474 AD, the Emperor Glycerius was deposed and forced to become a bishop. Unlike nearly everyone else in this account, he survived. Not every emperor died by the sword. In 14 AD, Augustus, the first emperor, died at the age of 75 after ruling for over 40 years. Later sources, particularly Tacitus, suggested his wife Livia had poisoned him with figs to ensure Tiberius would succeed without complication. Most modern historians doubt this, but the fact that the rumor attached itself to even the most stable succession in Roman history says something about how Rome understood imperial power. In 180 AD, Marcus Aurelius died of what was most likely plague while stationed on the Danube frontier. What followed was not quiet. His son Commodus became one of the worst emperors in Roman history, and 12 years later he was strangled in his bath. In 211 AD, Septimius Severus died of illness at York. on the same city where Constantius Chlorus would die nearly a century later in 306 AD. In both cases, a son standing at the deathbed immediately claimed the throne. In 79 AD, Vespasian died of fever. In 270 AD, Claudius Gothicus, the general who had likely helped plot the murder of Gallienus, died of plague after just 2 years on the throne. In 337 AD, Constantine died near Nicomedia shortly after being baptized. His sons immediately began killing each other over the succession. In 361 AD, Constantius II, the last of those sons still alive, died of fever while marching to confront Julian, the cousin he had spent years trying to control. In 395 AD, Theodosius I died of disease at 48. The empire was formally divided between his two sons and never reunited. In 423 AD, Honorius, and the emperor who had been ruling when the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 AD, died of disease. One account claims that when first told Rome had fallen, he thought they meant his pet chicken, which he had named Roma. In 311 AD, Diocletian, the only emperor to voluntarily abdicate and stay retired, died at his palace in Split. In 364 AD, the Emperor Jovian died after only 8 months, likely from a charcoal brazier left burning in his sealed bedroom. And in 375 AD, Valentinian I was meeting with envoys from the Quadi tribe when he screamed at them with such force that he burst a blood vessel in his brain and dropped dead. Among 5 centuries of Roman rule, a few deaths outlasted the empire itself. In 260 AD, the Emperor Valerian marched east to confront the Persian king Shapur I. Plague had already weakened his army. Near Edessa, he agreed to meet Shapur directly, possibly lured by false negotiations, possibly out of desperation. He was seized and taken prisoner. No Roman emperor before or after was ever captured alive by a foreign enemy. According to the writer Lactantius, Shapur used Valerian as a human footstool to mount his horse. Some accounts say he was kept in chains for years. Others claim he was eventually flayed alive, his skin stuffed with straw, dyed red, and displayed in a Persian temple. Rome made no serious attempt to rescue him. His son Gallienus continued to rule as though his father had simply ceased to exist. In 68 AD, the Senate declared Nero a public enemy. His own Praetorian Guard, the same institution that had killed so many emperors before him, abandoned him. He fled Rome with a handful of freedmen and hid in a villa outside the city. He paced. He wept. He held a dagger up and put it down again. When horsemen arrived to take him alive, his secretary Epaphroditus had to guide the blade into his throat. He was 30 years old. His death ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the bloodline of Augustus himself, and the year of 4 emperors that followed killed Galba, Otho, and Vitellius within 12 months. And then there was the last one. On September 4th, 476 AD, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the emperor Romulus Augustulus. He was roughly 16 years old. He was not executed. He was not dragged through the streets. He was not thrown into the Tiber. He was sent to live in Campania on a pension. The Western Roman Empire simply stopped.